to begin with as a sort of pedagogical step. To a mind that is so accustomed to giving its attention, to giving its power of knowing to an object. To such a mind, it is helpful to begin with to say, turn the light of your knowing away from the object with which you have so thoroughly mixed yourself as to have lost yourself in it. To such a mind, the teaching says, take the light of your knowing, cease shining your knowing on the object. Unmix yourself from the object. And turn that knowing around on yourself, on the source of knowing, in other words, instead of the mind going outwards towards the object, the teaching says, no, turn your attention or the light of your knowing back in the other direction to the source from which it has arisen, which is pure consciousness. So that's a halfway stage or an initial suggestion just to really establish the nature of this knowing. So when it becomes clear, when we have had this experiential realization, yes, I am this pure knowing, that's what I essentially am, just pure knowing or being knowing or aware being. And then that's the first stage, to realize that is what I essentially am, and then to stay there for a while and to discover not just that is what I am, but to discover the nature of that aware being. And then we can then go back to what previously seemed to be objects, perceptions, sensations, and we see actually that they're not objects that are known by a separate subject. We've discovered that actually all there is to the apparent object is the knowing of it. In other words, this knowing can then go back out into the realm of the mind, the body, and the world, and discover that actually the only substance that is present in our experience is knowing. So there's, first of all, because this light of pure knowing has become so thoroughly mixed and entangled with thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, that there is this initial untangling process where we turn the light we separate the knowing out from the known, and we turn the knowing back on itself in order to discover its true nature. Then later on we go back to the objects that what were previously thought of to be objects that were separate from ourselves, and we realize that they are not just pervaded by this knowing, but actually made out of this knowing. But this disentanglement process of the light of knowing or pure consciousness rising in the form of the mind and going outwards towards the object, mixing itself with the object, and then disentangling itself and going back to its source, it's a very natural process. It's something that happened in deep sleep, this disentanglement. The pure knowing is separated out from the mind, the body, and the world. Gradually, as we fall asleep, first of all the world disappears, then the body, then the mind disappears, and it leaves just pure knowing. And this is the disentanglement process, pure knowing just flowing back to its source. And then the mind rises again, seems to go outwards to know the object. So this process of rising as the mind and flowing back to the source is a very natural process. It doesn't just happen every 24 hours when we fall asleep. It happens every time a thought comes to an end. Every time a thought comes to an end, we plunge into our true nature. The mind, every time, because the mind is just the current thought. Every time the thought comes to an end, the mind comes to an end. But when I say the mind comes to an end, all I mean is consciousness is divested of a limit. There is no such thing as mind. There's no such thing as the end of the mind. When I say the mind comes to an end, it's just a way of speaking. The mind is simply an apparent limit on infinite consciousness. So when infinite consciousness takes the form of thought, it becomes mind. When that thought comes to an end, consciousness ceases to be veiled, and it shines as pure consciousness. That is what's called the end of the mind. It's not really the end of the mind, it's the end of an apparent limit upon infinite consciousness. Every time a thought comes to an end, there's this disentangling process. We return, we plunge into our true nature. And then when thought rises again, an apparent limit is superimposed on consciousness that makes it seem to be finite. That's what we call mind. So this back and forth is happening all the time. It's like a kind of ebb and flow of returning to our true nature and rising in the form of the mind, and as the mind seeming to know an object. Then the object-knowing mind dissolving and flowing back into its source. This is happening all the time, back and forth, back and forth.
I guess the question is, in knowing this object, this mind, knowing the object, there seems to be at least a couple of flavors of that. One with more identification where the limit appears, and another one where there's
exactly
even if there's
that's it. Yeah. So after a while of this back and forth, when we begin to separate out this pure knowing, when we become acquainted with just the experience of being aware, and we see that this being aware is not actually mixed with anything. It's not innately mixed with thoughts or feelings or sensations or perceptions. It's just that's what it means. Pure consciousness. That means it's unmixed. It doesn't have a name, a form, a shape, a gender, an age, a weight, a location. It's just pure, transparent knowing, pure consciousness. When we begin to be acquainted with that, then when pure consciousness rises in the form of the mind and seems to know as a result an object, we don't lose ourselves to the object anymore. In other words, the mind arises, and all the appearances of objects arise, but we keep knowing, only knowing. We see that our entire experience, which is thinking, feeling, sensing and perceiving, is actually just made of knowing. So then there's no question of getting lost in thoughts, feelings, sensations and perceptions again, because it is just all made out of the same stuff, all made out of pure knowing. It's akin to turning on the television screen and turning on the movie and getting completely lost in the movie. Yeah, now in order to cease being lost in the movie, we have to turn the film off. The moment we turn the movie off, we realize, oh, it's just a screen, it's just an empty screen. Turn the movie back on again, 2 minutes later we're completely lost in the thriller. And we notice we're lost in the thriller, turn the movie off, oh, it's just a screen. Now after you've done that a few times, you notice one day that when you turn the movie on again, no matter how frightening the thriller is, you never lose the knowledge of the screen. You realize that the screen is not going off and on. It's not appearing and disappearing. It seemed to disappear when the movie came on. You turn the movie off, the screen seemed to become apparent again. That's just a halfway stage. After a while you realize, no, the screen is never disappearing. It doesn't matter whether the movie is running or not. And then, the final stage, when the movie is there, you realize there's no such thing as the movie and the screen. all it is, all the time, is just the screen. There's no such thing as a movie. A movie is just a temporary modulation of the ever-present screen. So there's this ebb and flow, back and forth, turning off and on the movie. And then after a while, when the movie is on again, that is when the consciousness has risen in the form of the mind and is looking outwards at objects, then it dawns on us, actually no, these objects, the movie, it's all the screen, it's all made out of knowing. It's all this single, infinite substance. This, all these apparently finite objects are made out of this infinite stuff called pure consciousness. Then you can go anywhere in experience. You can go out into the mind, the body, and the world. You can go wherever you want. You can do whatever you like. You can't get lost anymore in experience, because the only substance present in experience is yourself, pure consciousness. And everything you experience is made out of that. Everything you experience is made out of yourself. Then you no longer need to do the back and forth. Although it still takes place, there is still the dissolution of the mind every time a thought comes to an end. That's just a natural mechanism that keeps taking place. But when thought arises, when apparent objects arise again, you no longer lose yourself to them or in them.